The Kixari Supreme Admiral Vethrix stared at the holographic display with compound eyes widening in disbelief. What should have been a routine subjugation had turned into a military disaster. 17 battlecruisers lost. Over 20,000 crew members vaporized. All against a species that had barely achieved rudimentary space travel. Impossible, Vethrix chittered, mandibles clicking in agitation. Play the battle footage again. The hologram flickered, showing the human vessel, primitive, barely spaceworthy, ramming itself deliberately into the command ship of the Kixari fleet. The explosion that followed had triggered a chain reaction, destroying nearly a third of the invasion force. They sacrificed themselves, murmured Science Officer Peluria, her luminescent antennae dimming in contemplation. The humans knew they couldn't win conventionally. Barbaric, sneered Fleet Commander Dozark. Utterly primitive. No, Vethrix corrected. Tactical. They recognized our command structure and targeted accordingly. The Admiral's exoskeleton creaked as he leaned forward. And now we need reinforcements to subdue a pre-FTL species. The Galactic hierarchy wouldn't be pleased. In 15,000 cycles of expansion, no species had cost them so much during initial contact. The humans should have surrendered at the first show of superior technology. That's what the sociological models had predicted. On Earth, Colonel Reyna Marquez stood in the smoking ruins of Outpost Sentinel, the former listening station that had detected the alien fleet 3 days earlier. Rain pelted her uniform as she surveyed what remained of humanity's first line of defense. Of the 200 personnel stationed here, only 38 survived. Colonel, Lieutenant Ekwa Nkosi approached, limping but alert. We've intercepted communications. They're regrouping, not retreating. Marquez nodded, her face expressionless despite the churning dread in her stomach. Earth's nations had united overnight when the Kixari arrived, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Conventional weapons barely scratched the alien vessels. Their only advantage had been that the invaders hadn't expected resistance at all. What about Project Typhoon? She asked. Ready to deploy, but we have only 5 prototypes. The quantum instability makes mass production impossible. Marquez looked up at the cloud-choked sky, knowing what lurked beyond. Humanity had days, maybe hours, before the invaders returned with reinforcements. Tell Central Command we're activating contingency Helios, she ordered. Nkosi's eyes widened. Colonel, that's our only option, Marquez finished. The Kixari came expecting submission. Instead, we'll give them a lesson in human resolve. Across the globe, civilization braced for another assault. Cities became fortresses. Civilians armed themselves with whatever they could find. Scientists worked around the clock. Reverse engineering captured alien technology. But what separated humans from their would-be conquerors wasn't technology. It was psychology. In the Kixari war room, Vethrix received the final battle plans from Hierarchy Command. Overwhelming force, the Supreme Admiral explained to his officers. We'll target their major population centers simultaneously. Their resistance will crumble when they see the hopelessness of their situation. And if it doesn't? Asked Peluria, her scientific mind always considering alternatives. Vethrix's mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile among his kind. Then we'll discover whether human resolve can withstand orbital bombardment. What the Kixari couldn't comprehend was that humans had evolved as persistence hunters on a harsh world. When faced with extinction, they didn't break. They burned brighter. And as the alien reinforcements approached Earth, they were about to discover what happened when you cornered a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and its own self-destructive tendencies. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove the universe wrong. And in the coldness of space, the second wave of the Kixari invasion force had no idea they were flying toward a species that had turned desperation into its deadliest weapon. The Kixari. Reinforcements arrived in Earth's orbit with overwhelming numbers. A flotilla of 300 ships arranged in perfect geometric formation. Their hulls gleamed with an iridescent blue-black sheen that absorbed radar and light alike. Weapons bristled from every surface, poised to rain destruction upon the defiant planet below. Admiral Jaisal, newly appointed after Vethrix's demotion, surveyed the blue world through the command deck's viewing portal. Unlike his predecessor, he would not underestimate these primitives. Begin atmospheric insertion, Jysol ordered. Standard conquest protocol. On his command bridge, tactical displays showed Earth's major cities illuminated as primary targets. The hierarchy had been clear. Make examples of the population centers and the rest would capitulate. It was a strategy that had worked on 17 other civilizations. Admiral, his sensory officer interrupted, we're detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's polar regions. Gysol's attention shifted to the readings. Analysis? Unknown technology. Nothing like their previous weapon systems. Before Jysol could issue new orders, brilliant beams of concentrated light erupted from Earth's surface. They weren't targeting the Kixari ships. They were hitting the orbital debris field surrounding the planet. What are they? Jysol began, then froze as the tactical implications became clear. The humans had weaponized their own space junk. Thousands of metal fragments, accelerated by precisely calculated laser pulses, became hypersonic projectiles. The orbital cloud expanded outward like a deadly blossom, tearing through the perfect Kixari formations. Ships designed to withstand energy weapons found their hulls perforated by primitive chunks of human metal. Evasive maneuvers, Jysol barked, but the order came too late. In Central Command beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Darius Kapoor watched as Operation Kessler unfolded exactly as modeled. Decades of accumulated space debris, everything from defunct satellites to discarded rocket stages, had been cataloged and targeted. We're registering impacts across 87% of their fleet, reported Major Ilona Varadi, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Their formation is breaking apart. Kapoor nodded grimly. Launch the Typhoon prototypes, 5 sleek vessels, barely larger than fighter jets, detached from concealed mountain hangars. Each carried a single pilot and the most dangerous technology humans had ever created. Quantum disruption cores harvested from the wreckage of the first Kixari invasion force. Captain Mikhail Orlov felt his Typhoon craft vibrate as it broke atmosphere. The cockpit systems were a hybrid of human and reverse-engineered alien tech, unfamiliar yet somehow intuitive. 4 other Typhoons followed in tight formation. Remember, Orlov transmitted to his squadron, we only get one shot at this. Target their command vessels. The Typhoons accelerated to speeds that would have killed their pilots if not for the inertial dampening fields. They appeared as mere blips on Kixari sensors, lost amid the chaos of the orbital debris assault. In the Kixari flagship, Admiral Jysol struggled to restore order. 37 ships had already been disabled, their hulls breached, crews either dead or desperately sealing compartments against the vacuum. Reconfigure to defensive formation Delta, he commanded. Target those ground-based energy weapons and, Admiral, the sensory officer interrupted again. Small craft approaching at high velocity. On the tactical display, 5 tiny signatures, weaved through the debris field, somehow navigating the metal storm with impossible precision. Intercept them, Jysol ordered. But even as he spoke, the human craft split formation, each heading toward a different command vessel. Orlov's Typhoon zeroed in on the Kixari flagship, its quantum disruption core humming with increasing intensity. The alien vessel loomed before him, impossibly massive, bristling with weapons that now turned in his direction. For Earth, he whispered as energy beams sliced through space around him. His hand hovered over the activation sequence. In that moment, as human ingenuity faced alien technological superiority, the true battle wasn't about firepower. It was about who wanted victory more desperately. And desperation had always been humanity's most refined art. Captain Orlov's Typhoon craft spiraled through a maze of energy beams, each maneuver bringing him closer to the Kixari flagship. The quantum disruption core behind his seat pulsed with increasing frequency. Its alien technology never meant to be weaponized this way. Approaching optimal deployment range, the AI co-pilot announced in its eerily calm voice. Orlov's squadron had already scattered, each pilot on a suicide run against different command vessels. Their mission wasn't to destroy the ships, it was something far more insidious. On the Kixari flagship, Admiral Jizol watched with growing alarm as the human craft evaded their most sophisticated targeting systems.
"How are they predicting our weapon patterns?" he demanded. Science Officer Mithrix, hastily transferred from the research division, ventured an answer. "The humans appear to be using our own technology against us. Those craft contain components
from our fallen ships." Jizol's compound eyes narrowed. Impossible. They couldn't have reverse-engineered our systems so quickly. They didn't need to understand it, Mithrix explained. They merely needed to repurpose it. As if confirming this assessment, the human craft suddenly accelerated to impossible speeds, closing the final distance to the flagship. Defense beams scored direct hits, but too late. The craft had already pressed against the hull, almost like a gentle kiss. Then it detonated. The explosion itself was minimal, barely damaging the flagship's outer hull. But the quantum disruption, core released something far more dangerous than mere force. It unleashed a cascading field of temporal distortion. Alarms blared throughout the Kixari vessel as systems failed in chaotic sequence. Weapons powered down, gravity fluctuated wildly, and most critically, the psychic command network that linked the Kixari hierarchy collapsed. Across Earth's orbit, the same scene repeated as the other typhoons found their targets. One by one, the command vessels fell silent, their crews trapped, in bubbles where time itself became unreliable. In Central Command, General Kapoor watched the telemetry from the Typhoon Squadron disappear. All 5 pilots lost, but their sacrifice had created a window of opportunity. "Launch the second wave," he ordered. Major Virati hesitated. "Sir, the civilian casualties will be far greater if we fail," Kapoor finished. "The Kixari don't recognize non-combatants. Everyone on Earth is a target now. Throughout the planet's oceans, submarines surface just enough to launch their payloads. Not nuclear missiles, but something the Kixari had never encountered. Biological warfare tailored specifically to their physiology. Dr. Ishana Virani had led the team that analyzed the remains of Kixari soldiers from the first invasion. What they discovered was both horrifying and useful. The aliens shared a hive mind-like neural structure that made them devastatingly efficient as a military force, but created a critical vulnerability. The biological agents, delivered via atmospheric dispersion missiles, targeted the unique receptors in the Kixari nervous system, not to kill, but to sever their psychic connections. In the disabled flagship, Admiral Jizol experienced something no Kixari had felt in 10,000 years of evolution: isolation. The constant background presence of the collective consciousness vanished, leaving only terrifying silence. Around him, crew members writhed in similar distress, some clawing at their exoskeletons, others curling into fetal positions. A species that had never known true individuality suddenly found itself fragmented into thousands of disconnected minds. On Earth, Colonel Marquez watched the biological missiles detonate in the upper atmosphere, releasing their payload into the orbital paths of the alien fleet. "Will it work?" asked Lieutenant Nkosi. "Dr. Virani says it will affect 90% of their forces," Marquez replied. "But it's what happens next that matters." As the biological agent spread through the Kixari fleet, something unexpected occurred. Without the hierarchical command structure, without the collective consciousness guiding them, individual Kixari began making their own decisions for the first time, and not all of them wanted to continue the war. In the chaos of their fractured hive mind, a new question emerged among the Kixari, one that would change the course of the invasion, and perhaps the nature of their civilization itself. What if the humans weren't meant to be conquered? The Galactic Hierarchy Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 7 centuries. The 9 eldest representatives of the founding species gathered in their orbital sanctum, floating above the ancestral homeworld of Quintaris. Prime High Counselor Gentar, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that conveyed deep distress, addressed the assembly. "The Kixari expedition has failed catastrophically," she announced. "Not only have they lost approximately 60% of their invasion force, but the humans have somehow disrupted the Kixari collective consciousness. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber as data streams flowed between the members. The implications were staggering. These humans, rumbled Councillor Vox Mafir, his gaseous form swirling in agitation, they've been space-capable for less than a century. How could they possibly counter technologies we've refined over millennia? Because, replied Gentar, they aren't fighting with technology alone. They're fighting with something our simulations failed to account for. Evolutionary desperation. On Earth, humanity pressed its advantage. With the Kixari fleet in disarray, international space agencies launched every available vessel equipped with the remaining quantum disruption cores harvested from downed alien ships. In what would later be called the Swarm Offensive, hundreds of small craft, many little more than retrofitted satellites with minimal propulsion, surrounded the remaining Kixari vessels. Each carried a micro-quantum disruptor, not powerful enough to create temporal distortions, but sufficient to interfere with the aliens' communication systems. Commander Rez Faramarzi directed the operation from the International Space Station, which had been transformed into a military command center when the invasion began. Swarm units in position, reported his tactical officer, Dr. Petra Novak. Her background in chaos theory had proved unexpectedly valuable in developing the swarming algorithms. Disruptors activating in 3, 2, 1. Throughout Earth's orbit, the micro-disruption fields activated simultaneously. No single field was powerful enough to disable a Kixari vessel, but their overlapping effect created a communications dead zone that enveloped the entire alien fleet. Within the Kixari flagship, Admiral Jaisal struggled to regain control. The biological agent had weakened but not completely severed his connection to the collective. Around him, crew members were either incapacitated or functioning at minimal capacity. "Status report," he demanded, his voice lacking its usual resonant authority. Navigation Officer Kylix managed to respond, though his movements were erratic. "We're isolated, Admiral. No contact with the hierarchy, no contact with other vessels, and the humans, they're surrounding us." Jaisal accessed the external sensors. What he saw defied belief. A cloud of primitive devices encircling his mighty fleet, each emitting a disruptive field that shouldn't have posed any threat individually. Yet together, they had effectively neutered the most powerful invasion force in the sector. "They're hurting us," Jaisal realized with dawning comprehension. The humans weren't trying to destroy his fleet. They were corralling it. On Earth, United Defense Council President Erona Morgan addressed the emergency session of global leaders. "The Kixari fleet has been neutralized as a fighting force," she announced, her voice steady despite 3 days without sleep. "But we must now decide our next move carefully. This may be our only chance to establish terms." Kixari biology and psychology were still largely mysteries, but one thing had become clear from captured communications. They respected strength and decisiveness. Showing mercy might be interpreted as weakness. General Kapoor stood to address the council. "We have the upper hand temporarily, but we can't maintain the disruption fields indefinitely. I recommend we demonstrate our resolve through a calculated strike against their flagship, then offer terms." Science advisor Virani countered immediately. "The disruption of their collective consciousness has created unprecedented psychological chaos among the Kixari. Some may be experiencing individual thought for the first time. This could be an opportunity for diplomatic contact rather than further hostilities." President Morgan weighed both perspectives, keenly aware that humanity's future might depend on this decision. The room fell silent, 57 world leaders awaiting her verdict. Before she could speak, a communication officer burst into the chamber. "Madam President, we're receiving a transmission from the Kixari flagship. They're requesting dialogue." In the tense silence that followed, humanity stood at a crossroads. The choice they made would determine not just Earth's fate, but potentially reshape galactic politics forever. Because for the first time in Kixari history, a military commander was acting without hierarchy authorization and seeking peace. Landing site chosen for the unprecedented meeting was symbolic. The ancient plateau of Giza, where human civilization had first demonstrated its ability to create monumental structures that endured millennia. The Great Pyramid stood as a silent witness to this potential turning point in galactic history. A small Quixari shuttle descended through the atmosphere, its design less aggressive than the warships in orbit, but still alien in its organic curves and iridescent surface. Egyptian military forces formed a perimeter 1 kilometer from the landing zone, while a delegation of 12 humans waited at the designated meeting point. President Morgan stood flanked by General Kapoor and Dr. Virani, with representatives from every continent completing the group. They wore no environmental protection, a calculated risk based on preliminary analysis of Quixari biology that suggested no immediate biohazard concerns. The shuttle's outer hull rippled as it touched down, adapting to Earth's gravity. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, a portal dilated open. Admiral Geisel emerged, flanked by Science Officer Mithrix and 4 Quixari who moved with the precision of elite guards. Without their normal psychic connection, they had to rely on visual signals and vocalized clicks to coordinate their movements. President Morgan stepped forward exactly 3 paces, the distance recommended by xenolinguists, as non-threatening yet confident. "I am Marona Morgan, representing the United Nations of Earth," she announced, her voice amplified just enough to carry clearly across the space between them. The translation algorithms developed from intercepted Quixari communications activated, converting her words into the clicks and harmonic tones of the alien language. Geisel's compound eyes studied her, then swept across the human delegation. When he spoke, his mandibles created complex patterns that the human systems translated with a half-second delay. "I am Fleet Admiral Geisel of the Greater Quixari Concordance. I come without hierarchy authorization to seek understanding of your species." The admission sent a ripple of tension through both delegations. For a Quixari admiral to act independently was unprecedented, and potentially treasonous by their standards. "You've demonstrated capabilities that contradict all our assessments," Geisel continued. "Our models predicted submission, not innovation, not this resolve." Dr. Virani stepped forward, having been designated as the scientific spokesperson. "Your models failed to account for human evolutionary psychology. We evolved as cooperative hunters who faced extinction-level threats multiple times in our development. When threatened, we don't surrender. We adapt." Mithrix moved closer to Geisel, his antennae quivering with what the humans' cultural analysts interpreted as intense interest. "You weaponized our own technology against us," the science officer observed. "The quantum disruptors, the biological agent that targets our collective consciousness. How did you accomplish this so quickly?" General Kapoor answered, his military bearing unchanged despite standing before beings from another star system. "Necessity. When survival is at stake, humans can compress centuries of scientific advancement into days." "And now?" Geisel asked. "Your species has effectively neutralized our invasion force. Why request dialogue rather than demanding surrender?" President Morgan took control of the conversation again. "Because we recognize something fundamental about conflict. It usually stems from misunderstanding. We want to understand why you came to our world with weapons rather than greetings." The question seemed to discomfort Geisel, his exoskeleton shifting in subtle ways that suggested internal conflict. When he finally answered, the translation carried nuances of confusion. "It is the hierarchy protocol for all encounters with pre-FTL civilizations. Assessment, subjugation, integration. This has been our way for 15,000 cycles. No species has ever resisted as you have." Dr. Virani seized on this revelation. "Then perhaps it is time for the hierarchy to develop a new protocol, one based on mutual respect rather than dominance." As the desert sun began to set behind the pyramids, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, the conversation continued. 2 species evolved on worlds light years apart, searching for common ground amid the aftermath of conflict. What neither delegation fully grasped was that across the Quixari fleet, something unprecedented was occurring. With their collective consciousness fragmented, individual Quixari were experiencing personal revelation. Officers and crew members were questioning orders, procedures, the very foundation of their society. And throughout the galaxy, other species, under hierarchy control, were watching, waiting to see if humanity would succeed where they had failed, enforcing the dominant power to negotiate rather than dictate. The pyramids had witnessed the rise and fall of countless human empires. Now they stood witness to what might become the most significant diplomatic exchange in galactic history. 6 months after the attempted invasion, Earth had changed irrevocably. The skies above major cities now featured not only clouds and birds, but the distinctive silhouettes of trading vessels from 7 different galactic civilizations. Humanity had been thrust onto the interstellar stage not through gradual discovery, but through defiance. In Geneva, the newly constructed Galactic Embassy complex housed diplomatic missions from 24 species, some allies of the Kixari, others long-subjugated races who saw in humanity a potential liberator. Ambassador Lavanya Chandrasekhar, formerly a professor of international relations, now found herself negotiating treaties with beings who breathed methane or communicated through polarized light. Today, she faced her most challenging meeting yet. The High Council of the Galactic Hierarchy had finally sent its representative. Councillor Gentar's crystalline form refracted sunlight across the meeting chamber as she settled into the specially designed conference pod. Unlike the Kixari, who needed environmental adjustments for Earth's gravity, the crystalline Zentari adapted easily to different planetary conditions. Ambassador Chandrasekhar, Gentar began, her thoughts translated through a sophisticated interface. The hierarchy has reviewed the provisional agreement negotiated with Admiral Jizol. We find it unprecedented. Lavanya maintained her diplomatic composure. Unprecedented circumstances call for unprecedented solutions, Counselor. Indeed, no species has ever transitioned from pre-FTL status to conditional autonomy without first passing through at least a century of protectorate status, the crystalline being shifted, creating a cascade of rainbow patterns. Many on the Council view this as dangerous precedent, and yet, here you are, Lavanya observed, suggesting that at least some view it as necessary adaptation. Across Earth, the integration of alien technology proceeded at an astonishing pace. In what had once been Silicon Valley, Dr. Virani led a joint human Kixari research team investigating the disrupted collective consciousness phenomenon. The laboratory hummed with activity as scientists from both species worked side by side, their former enmity transformed into cautious collaboration. The neural regeneration is proceeding faster than projected, noted Research Director Mithrix, who had requested permanent assignment to Earth after the failed invasion. Many Kixari are regaining their connection to the collective, but something has fundamentally changed. Dr. Virani nodded, reviewing the neural scans. They're maintaining individuality within the collective framework. I'd hypothesized this possibility, but seeing it actually manifest is remarkable. What neither scientist verbalized was the revolutionary implication. The Kixari were evolving from a hierarchical hive mind into something new, a collective of individuals, united but distinct. In orbit, aboard the International Cooperation Station, formerly the ISS, now expanded with Kixari and Zentari modules, Commander Faramarzi supervised the installation of Earth's first faster-than-light communication array. Careful with that quantum resonator, he cautioned as technicians positioned the alien device. If the calibration is off by even a picometer, we'll be sending messages to the wrong century, not just the wrong location. Lieutenant Commander Novak floated beside him, monitoring the integration on her tablet. The Kixari engineers say they've never seen an adaptation like this. Apparently, our primitive communication protocols actually improve their quantum entanglement efficiency. Faramarzi allowed himself a small smile. Humanity's gift to the galaxy, doing more with less. But not all of Earth embraced the new reality. In remote areas, resistance movements formed, convinced that humanity had traded one form of subjugation for another. Their leader, a former military officer named Vero Kadic, had amassed a following through fiery speeches about maintaining human independence. They came as conquerors, he told a crowd gathered in a mountain stronghold. Now they come as partners, but the end result will be the same. Earth reduced to a footnote in their galactic empire. What Kadich and his followers failed to comprehend was that humanity had already changed the equation. The Kixari incident had sent shockwaves through the hierarchy, challenging 15 millennia of expansion doctrine. Back in Geneva, Ambassador Chandrasekhar reached the critical point in her negotiation with Gentar. The conditional autonomy. Agreement requires Earth to share its defensive innovations, the crystalline counselor noted. Yet you've proposed amendments limiting this knowledge transfer. We will share the technology, Lavanya clarified, but not with the hierarchy directly. Rather, with all member species equally. The disruption technology, the quantum interfaces, these should not be controlled by any single authority. That would fundamentally alter the power structure that has maintained galactic stability for 15,000 years, Gentar protested. Lavanya leaned forward, her voice steady but intense. Perhaps that stability has come at too high a cost for too many species. Perhaps true stability comes not from domination but from balance. In that moment, as a human diplomat faced one of the galaxy's most ancient powers, the core truth that had saved Earth became clear. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or military might, but the ability to imagine and fight for a different future than the one prescribed to them. Across the stars, subjugated species watched. The Kixari collective evolved, and humanity, barely 6 months into its galactic citizenship, had already begun reshaping the cosmic order, because when faced with overwhelming force, humans didn't submit. They reimagined the rules of the game, and, in a universe of ancient hierarchies and rigid protocols, that was the most revolutionary act of all. In the decade that followed Earth's dramatic entrance onto the galactic stage, the ripples of change became a tsunami. The Earth Doctrine, as it came to be known, spread through the hierarchy's territories. The radical notion that relationships between species should be based on mutual benefit rather than dominance and submission. The Kixari, once the hierarchy's primary enforcement arm, underwent the most dramatic transformation. Their evolved consciousness, individual minds linked but not subsumed by the collective, made them natural intermediaries between hierarchical and democratic species. Admiral Jazal, once dispatched to conquer Earth, became the first Kixari ambassador to the planet he had failed to subjugate. Standing before the United Nations General Assembly on the 10th anniversary of First Contact, his mandibles formed the patterns of humble reflection. "We came to teach humans their place in the galaxy," he told the assembled representatives. "Instead, you taught us, and by extension the hierarchy, that the true measure of civilization is not technological advancement or military might, but the capacity for growth and change." In orbit above, the first human-designed faster-than-light vessel, the UESS Resilience prepared for its maiden voyage. Its captain, Ekwa Nkosi, once a lieutenant who had witnessed Earth's darkest hours during the invasion, stood on the bridge, surveying her crew of humans, Kixari and representatives from 3 other species. "Navigation," she ordered. "Set course for the Centauri conclave." As the Resilience engaged its drives, tearing a precisely calculated hole in space-time, humanity stepped fully into its new role. Not conquerors, not the conquered, but catalysts for a galactic reformation that would eventually be recorded as the greatest peaceful revolution in cosmic history. Because in the end, what the hierarchy and the Kixari and all the ancient spacefaring races had failed to understand about humans wasn't their technology or their tactics, or even their unexpected resilience. It was their fundamental refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. And in a universe governed by rules established millennia before humans looked up at the stars and dreamed, that refusal became the most powerful force of all.